Fuck, I love boobs though. I just wanna rub them.
Greetings ladies and gentlemen, I am SocioPsycho and this is Mob Reviews, and today we're going to be taking a look at Braveland Pirates. This is created by Tortuga Team, available for PC, Mac, and Linux. We'll be diving in and seeing how well this actually holds and stands up, for it is a casual hexagon turn-based strategy where you pick your troops in a military fashion and engage in combat, very similar or the same genre of King's Bounty. Now when we dive in here, first thing we're going to look at is option menu, and you can see in the video that it does have a wide berth of screen resolutions, which is actually very appreciative. It doesn't have anything else, as the visual quality of the game is quite simplistic. It doesn't mean that's bad by any measure, but it has been very watered down, cartoonish feel to it, although it has been running at 60 frames per second with no tearing, clipping, or crashing. When we go into a volume slider, you have your volume, music, and sound on adjustable sliders, which I definitely appreciate. I have not had any issues with the sound being too loud in the game, and there is no voice acting in the game to cover. Now, the first thing to note when we jump into the game is the fact of the story. Braveland itself is a 3-part adventure of different characters within this world. I played and reviewed the very first part when that came out, and I really enjoyed that one because how it tied your character with the events of the world and everything meshed together to make this sort of ominous feel of adventure and urgency to complete your tasks in the minimalistic world. The world size in the first game was a lot smaller than it is in this one, and that's not necessarily a boon to the game actually, and we'll go into that in a moment. But what I want to talk about when it comes to story is how they have not really tied the adventurous aspect of the heart of what the character is supposed to be to the overall theme of the world. In the first game, the world felt like you were being invaded. Land was being overtaken and you had to stop the tides of darkness, which made sense because you were fighting against a swarm of enemies that all wanted you dead. But here as a pirate, the writing and story plots that progress forward, the overall theme of a game ties together to a realization that you're a pirate because you're hunting for a legendary secret treasure and you have to find the scattered remnants of the map, which will allow you to piece the map together as a whole and find the island where this hidden treasure is. But outside of that theme of the game that ties your purpose of what you're doing together, there is no real enthralling feel of you as a pirate. The story is presented to the player as they talk to each combatant force before engaging in the combat. When you move up to the square upon where the enemy is, a little dialogue will happen and then you will engage in combat. The majority of these dialogues are just bravado or short little ego boosts of your companion saying, "Ooh, I can't wait to get that treasure," or "Ooh, I can't wait to kill that person." They offer no substance or real depth, not only for your character but your environment into the world themselves. And while what your companions may say in this linear driven narration does speak of wow, this person's greedy, I guess that fits into a pirate sense, it doesn't build onto the characters of the individual styles to make you tied in and feel like the captain of your crew. I'm not saying that there needs to be a choice selection and a dialogue tree, don't get me wrong, but what they do say does not make you feel like a pirate in any way. They do not even talk in your stereotypical pirate-esque arg matey, shiver me timbers, blah blah blah. So when you land on these next islands and try to find the next piece of a map and try to explore around and fight these different people, some will say, "Ha, I'm going to kill you because you are a pirate." But the majority are doing their own thing. You could be a farmer of goat sheep or winged two-headed camels. They wouldn't care. It doesn't tie into the events other than just mass combat experience. Whether you're in one area and you're fighting swarms of undead or you're fighting cultists, they don't care who you are, only that you're there and they can kill you. None of the story truly adds any depth outside the very selective few characters who are directly tied to a theme, i.e. have the missing piece of the map that you need. Now you may be asking, why am I going so much about a story in a game that is not that heavily on the story itself? And that's because the game is a little larger than it needs to be. And when you have a game that is larger than it's previous to in a series, you need something to tie in, especially when your mechanics of the game do not offer that much variation at what that means, why the mechanics of the game do not tie into the story itself. When we go into the armies that tie in to your base control that you experience through combat, you have a fine selection that become unlocked to you as you progress through the game. This selection starts off small with cabin boys. Now, cabin boys are useful because at that point you don't have anybody else available to you. But as you unlock the other characters in the game, the cabin boys become relatively useless, in between the fact that even with a max number of them of 60 or 62, they still do very little damage and contribute very little to the overall team mentality, as well as the fact that the hero themselves does not have any spell casting abilities or any real tactical depth to protect or shield your troops from enemy ranged units. So if, whether they be melee or ranged, get it into their mind to attack one of your troops, there's no real deterring them from doing that, exempt from killing that unit that's attacking them. So when you bring this into the fact that the cabin boys have so little health, so little armor, and do very little damage, when they get hit, they lose about 10 or 12, especially later on, close to the end of the game. Now you do have to take a note that this does depend on which level of difficulty you play the game, as there are 3 different levels of difficulty. I played it on the hardest difficulty and I didn't have any issues outside of 1 or 2 battles, which were really just stacked against the player with no tactical ability to make it onto your own terms. So when you play on the hardest setting, the cabin boys become obsolete very fast. The damage is next to nothing. And we look at the next unit, which is a pirate, and these pirates are actually one of the better ones in the game. They'll last you throughout the entire time because they do medium damage and they take medium health. So they're like a half tank, half DPS. They are able to survive, they have good DPS, and they can be highly useful. The drawback is they don't move very fast, but you work around that. You have the Daredevil, which are female sort of swashbucklers. They do attack from their double weapons, and they have a fair bit of damage to them, and you are able to command more of them. Now the thing is, when we talk about the units and preparation or lack of tactical capability in between your units, we've already established that the cabin boys are useless, the pirates are good, but when we look at having a ranged, we have the Popeye clone, the Cannoneer, who, while he may be of a higher rank and he does more damage and he has more health, you gotta figure the fact that he's not a tank. He's not prepared or equipped for melee combat. He's equipped for ranged combat. So while you can have only a few of these, as you can see I have 10 versus my Daredevil, which I have 24, even though the Daredevil do half the damage, they are able to move more, and they make up for that lack of damage by twice the numbers. So they really don't do any less in the damage department. They're able to move faster. The only advantage, and it's strategically tactical at certain points, not as a overall every combative use, is the fact that the Cannoneers have a cooldown shot which allows them to stun an opponent. Now this could be useful if you're going into a boss battle and you stun the boss and then everybody pounces on him, meaning that the boss cannot retaliate, counter-attack to everybody who's hitting him. Outside of a very brief tactical moment like that, they are useless in comparison to the fact that you can have the Daredevils, which are more proficient at killing. And this sort of comes down to the same issue with the cooks. Now while the cooks have a fair bit of health, the fact is that you have so few of them available to you that the only real advantage is their long capability of speed, being able to go across half the map easily within one turn, and perhaps further if you have the correct leveling up abilities or use a speed of momentum. But when it comes down to physical combat one-on-one, the chance to evade attack is supposed to be the highlight. But what I've seen is that has about a chance of happening in 1 in 5. Not 1 in every 5, 1 out of 5. Which means more times than not, he will get hit. And the amount of damage he will take, you're talking about 4 to 5 at higher levels zones where the cook will drop off. And if you only have 20, that means he's not going to last very long in trying to hold the line, and he doesn't do that much damage either. With the severe lack of capability tactically to control more or larger types of monsters, you can't really make him flourish on the hardest difficulty that you could with a character like him in King's Bounty, because you can't stack critical damage and critical gear and things like this to really augment your units to a certain high-powered velocity. It doesn't mean that you don't have some of that, but to the same degree, no, as he is more out there. It falls down, unfortunately, the game in between the army combination that they give you to tank and DPS. And if you're not on the front lines tanking, then obviously you're DPSing. And what good is a DPS who gets killed off the cuff because they're up so close in combat? So when you look at something like the Cook versus the Possessed, and you say, which one of these two would I want? The Possessed is the obvious answer because he does about the same amount of damage. 15 to 18 versus 12 to 14, so he actually does better damage. He has more health by 20, and he has the ability to take control of lower level enemies for 1 round. Now that capability is insanely useful because if you capture an enemy who's already used their turn and you put him on wait, then by the next turn, there's a chance that everybody else in the enemy army will attack that creature that you have mind controlled, thus severely weakening or destroying that creature and alleviating some of that damage that you would have taken otherwise. So the amount of alleviation that he can take off of your troops, off of your tanks, off of your DPS is huge, is way better of an option than just a Cook. And you have your hero who levels up throughout the game, so that's a given. You don't have an option to switch the hero, and the hero is a melee unit. There's no ranged versus melee. You have some special magical talents which are ranged, but your character himself is melee, so it makes sense for him to be a tank, to be up front on the front lines. Which leaves the only unit left. We've gone through 5 of these units and we've only pulled out, 3 of them are the obvious choices. Then what leaves with the last guy? And it just falls down to, I guess there's nothing better. It doesn't mean that the Thug, which is a giant black bearded guy, which is annoying in its own right because it's just a high-powered, testosterone-run, moronic person who doesn't really fit the overall theme of the entire game. But he's nothing more than a tank. Well, your character's already tank. So while he does do a fair bit of DPS as well, and his special ability to yell, which is just him throwing out testosterone more or less, and saying, I'm here, pay attention to me, not in a taunt, but in a, rawr, I'm scary, I hurt you with my voice, and my big hurtful meaning words, it's not a character that I am looking at in a way of, oh yes, this character is useful. Against a strong opponent, he will be destroyed at a fair pace. Your hero makes a better tank, because your hero isn't stacked. This is a unit, so they stack the units. Meaning your hero is not going to get weaker the more he takes damage, where these units in a stack will, because there's less of them fighting. The only reason you end up using the Thug in the later end games is simply by the fact that there is nothing else to use. And because you're so limited tactically in what you have available to choose from, and it comes down to, who should I take, the Cannoneers or the Thugs? Again, it comes down to the fact that the enemies will easily take down your ranged opponent, or if a melee gets into close range of your Cannoneer, they're meaningless, they're useless, and there's very little ways to prevent that from happening once the enemy gets it into their mind that that's what they want to do. So at least having a Thug, which is a big giant wall that can actually do some damage, is the obvious choice, unfortunately, over the Cannoneers, which means that the Cabin Boys, the Cannoneers, and the Cooks are pretty much obsolete in comparison. The power structure is radically altered against the favor of actual having choice. And how does that army supply, how does that convey into a sense of story progression? And it falls down to a fact, you have 7 islands that you adventure to and you fight multitude of battles in these islands. So you fight close to 100, if not over 100 fights with the same 7 units available to you, but not all from the beginning. As you progress through the game, they become available to you. So if you don't have a story which really ties in well and wraps the player in to make them feel like they have some sort of progression, like they are a pirate or a scoundrel or a bandit or a rogue or some sort of womanizer even, something to either disgust the player by the character's actions or to enthrall the player by the character's actions, you're just going to fall down to a repetitive notion upon the limited amount of mechanics because of a limited amount of troops you have the availability to command. And the story is not a strong point, unfortunately, in this game. It falls into a severe, poorly written, structured mannerism, which does take credit. Congratulations, I take my hat off to you. You managed to get that aspect completely right from the King's Bounty series. A series that is well known for not having a good story, or really not a story that is worth mentioning. And you have knacked that here today via your poor writing and limited control that you have no real enthralling nature into the game upon which I can find myself entertained by. Is the game necessarily bad? No. The combat is a simplistic turn-based strategy. Turns are initiated by in the unit structure who has the highest initiative. Someone with 4 initiative is going to go in the turn-based structure before somebody with 3. This structure allows you to place your troops in certain manners in a tactical location on the map to try to combat the enemy. But it all comes down because there is really a limitation in what you can choose from with your hero, as you do have a capability when we look at the hero talents. At level 15, you'll have 2 tiers unlocked. Now, perhaps if you really enjoy this game, this will offer a availability of replayability. One thing that is sort of short is that none of these unlocked are tied to achievements. And when you decide to choose one over the other in one of these talent trees, it blocks out the other one, meaning that you really have to choose which one. Now, I do sort of appreciate that from a replayability standpoint, to customizing your hero to a certain degree. I find it repulsive as a completionist because you are limiting my capability to become powerful and secure one field of study as a whole. Do these upgrades help within the limitations of the world? Yes, they do. These upgrades do allow you to feel more powerful. They do increase your overall capability and score within the game. But they're no more than bonuses. Just like the gear that you pick up, whether they be boots, as you throughout the game can see you increase in a different amount of boots, whether they be worn, simple, magical, which increases your protection against magic damage, or larger ones that really give you increased armor or health. As you can see, there's an increase in availability to these different gear sets, which can make your character feel a little stronger on top of the natural increase in ability as he levels up. But the weapons and the gear are really where your character feels more powerful as they level up, rather than the talents themselves. The talents can be useful, don't get me wrong, but they're not something that adds to the overall power feeling of the character himself. You're not unlocking some sort of spell which gives you a tactical advantage or usage that you're really looking forward to using if you combine it with a certain method. The game is very simplistic, and I do not fault the game, do not get me wrong. I do not fault the game for being casual. I do not fault the game for being small or simple. It's simply the fact that it overstayed its welcome way too much in doing so. As you progress through the game, you'll have different tricks that you will learn, whether it be a pistol shot, which will do a point damage amount based off of courage. Now, when you play a game like King's Bounty, it goes off of rage, and rage is gained by damage intaken by your troops and damage given out. The annoying thing is that you only gain courage by the outgoing damage done by your troops, so you have to initiate attack on your troops. Now, there is a buff in the talents that your hero can learn, but if your hero takes damage, then he will gain an extra stack of courage. This is the same thing as rage, but it's less effective because your troops don't gain it as much, which means your overall usage of these abilities are rather slim, which again ties because you have so few courage as you progress through the game. So you really have to select either something that is singularly tactically beneficial to what's happening right there, right now, for otherwise you might as well just use heal kits, because at the end of the game, when you complete a mission, because of the simplistic nature of how you gather money throughout the combat in the game, your troops will revive at a proportional cost of the money gained. So if you lose 50% of your troops, you'll lose maybe 50 to 80% of the gold gained, depending on who you lost. The thing and the problem when it comes to these tricks, like I said, you do not have enough courage to really acclimate a usage of these abilities overall. you will use them very rarely, such as smokescreen. Maybe you need to get your character in the beginning of a game to hit to a certain point, but at the same time, that doesn't always make sense because if you throw your hero up to the middle of the screen, then he's going to get killed by everybody else. And the whole units of support and everybody else are not going to be able to get to him to alleviate some of that pain. So the only time smokescreen is really that useful when you need to get in between the enemy and one of your other troops as to try to alleviate the pain and damage that troop is taking. And when you look at grenade is nice, it has a nice hit, but it costs 12. And throughout the majority of the game, your courage builds so slowly because of what I covered before that you don't really use it that often, especially not when you have something like the cannonade from the ship, which hits 3 targets. It doesn't do AoE splash damage, so you don't have to worry about hitting yourself, and it does way more damage. And while inspiration can be nice, that falls down again. You have to make sure that everybody that you have when you cast this, because it lasts 1 turn, is able to hit the enemy exactly on point. Charge increases the movement speeds by 1. Black Spot increases the damage done to a target by 50%. You have Invigorating Brew, which is too much of a risk because while it does increase your damage, it increases your chance of missing. And why spend 5 courage when courage is so hard to gain in the first place? And Delivery puts some units on the board, which is a cool ability, but doesn't really level up with you. So what's the point though when you have congratulations, the enemy has 60 in a stack, but your unit of skeletons has 9? It's going to get slaughtered in 2 seconds. It's not going to help you. It makes more sense to put out a medkit to heal your troops rather than put out a skeleton. The only times you really want to use a skeleton, again, is something that is severely tactically advantageous because you need to buy time. So it's not the fault that these tricks within themselves aren't all that amazing, or that some are obviously better than others, but it's the fault of the fact that you gain courage so seldomly throughout the battle that it makes the choice of what you pick very important to pick the right one. Which more times than not, especially when you're playing on harder settings, is you need to save money, which means you need to get your troops revived on combat field, not take the hit financially when you exit to a victory screen. The game has a huge disconnect in between how it handles its combat, and that's where the real fault is. I enjoyed the first game in this series, I really did. The first Braveland, I enjoyed it because it was small, it was simple, it understood that it was small and simple. The story was very basic and it fit with the theme of the world, and it didn't overstay its welcome. All of that is not true here. Now, perhaps if you are a casual turn-based strategy person, you will enjoy this game, but the game does not respect your time. And this is obvious in the difficulty. While I played it on hard, the beginning of the game was a little standoffish, but not that bad. The only points in the entire game where I found myself being in trouble due to the difficulty was situations that were so stacked against me to begin with, and it automatically threw me into battle. I didn't have time to fall back and assess the situation or prepare myself for a battle. I entered a conversation, it said, "Congratulations, you're now in combat." The difficulty, even in a hard setting, is a joke if you know what you're doing. But it has wild moments of sporadicness which become annoying because you really have no customization in your character's development, the armies that you choose, and you're limited into the talents and weapons and items and capability of how you build your character. I wanted to like this game. So at the end of the day, it's really annoying because I wanted to like this game. I went into it expecting some sort of resemblance to the first one, but I didn't get it. All I got was a larger than it needed to be experience that wasted my time, did not respect the effort I put in. There was never a cohesion in between your characters and the story. You never felt like a pirate or a badass. You feel like a victim of this world and its cruel humor, being put into situations that are always lopsided, whether it be in your favor, which takes away the lack of challenge, or in the enemy's favor, and to such a degree where you're just sitting there like, what the hell is this? If you've never played this style of game before, then yes, this is a game that you can get into as a learning curve. If you've played King's Bounty, unfortunately, this will not entertain you because of the size of the game. It overstays its welcome. It is too large for the limitations of the mechanics that it has offered to you, which falls into just a sense of repetitiveness and not being able to have a choice in how you experience these battles, such as, I wish I could do this as a mage, or I had a spell book, or maybe I want to go a warrior path, or an in-between leader. There is no depth of that category. And in the first game, that was fine. But when you increase the scale, all you're really doing is increasing the repetitive nature, and you can try to offset some of that with a enriching, captivating, enthralling, heart-pounding, motivating, surging story, which you do not have. So as a casual beginner to a turn-based hexagon playstyle, let's say I can recommend it to you. But for anybody with even the slightest inkling of knowledge upon these styles of games, you're not going to find anything here that really captivates, enthralls, or challenges you. And that is unfortunate to say. So I cannot recommend it for the mass majority of people. I have been SocioPsycho, this has been Mob Reviews. I hope this has been a help to you, and I'll see you next time.